Space is a dangerous place. Even recently, we have learned that the entire Artemis program at NASA has been rebooted, adding more rocket launches and more risk. But in other worlds and other galaxies, space is full of human life, music, adventure, romance, and fantastical new planets. Just in time for the release of Firebreak, Book 1 of the new Firebird Interlude trilogy, we are joined by longtime science fiction novelist Kathy Tyers to explore how the best space operas sing through this teeming expanse.
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Find another homeworld in Fantastical Truth. This is the podcast from Lorehaven.com, whose mission is to help you escape bad books and find a whole galaxy of the best Christian-made fantasy and science fiction, including space opera. I'm Stephen Burnett. Stephen, and I wrote a sci-fi novel myself, which launched last year from Enclave Publishing. It's called Above the Circle of Earth. It's getting 2 sequels, and I also publish Lorehaven.com.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I am hoping I can use up all of my frequent flyer miles soon to go to the moon, because there's supposed to be a moon launch happening really soon, I'm pretty sure. And this is episode 302, How Does Space Opera Sing of New Worlds?
Zach, 2 episodes ago, episode 300, we talked about that moon landing, the moon launch, the Artemis program, and a whole lot of what we said is now already out of date, so news changes fast. First off, I got to correct this. I did get a mention of the Martian gravity level wrong. It's not 3/5, it's 3/8 or 0.38, so that should have been one of those little mnemonics that helped me remember the actual rate. Now that I've corrected myself, I can correct what I couldn't have known, is that yes, now Artemis 3 is not going to land on the moon. As we said, that's the bad news, but the better news is that Artemis 3 is going to be more of an orbital mission, probably next year, if the Lord wills, and then maybe as soon as 2028, we get Artemis 4 and 5, which might actually land on the moon. So we're already expanding this franchise, and frankly, I'm up for more adventures in real life. Those are sometimes the best kinds, even ahead of the fictional adventures in fictional space.
Yeah, so I guess we'll have to settle for some really good science fiction that we're going to talk about today. And it's good that we have no shortage of it. I think we're living in just a wonderful time to have so many great stories to explore, even if, maybe I'm not going to be able to jump on a space plane anytime soon. Although I would almost rather wait for a teleporter. Be honest, Stephen, I get motion sick very easily. I have to take Dramamine, even to go on a bus or a train long distance. I always prefer to drive for that reason. Not so fond of flying. I don't think I'd do well, to be honest, in a rocket launch. So, if the teleporter, as long as it doesn't discombobulate me, but it puts me all back in one piece, I think I'd rather go that route.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that quantum vaulting, at least, is certainly not free of those kinds of side effects. So you may need to pick your poisonous mode of transport there. Meanwhile, pray for the astronauts of the Artemis program and pray for sci-fi authors. And then also, while you're at it, you might look a little closer to home and pray for the people of Iran. We've just learned they have some really big decisions ahead. That doesn't have anything to do with space travel or space opera, but I thought I'd give them a shout out there. Speaking of missions that we hope will be successful at Lorehaven, we've got a review of a sci-fi novel that's also a little closer to home, more of a dystopian variety there. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but it's a novel by L.E. Richmond called Andromache or Andromache. That's the name of the heroine, who's apparently got some issues with her home world. You can see that review at Lorehaven.com. We do weekly reviews of the best Christian-made fantasy and sci-fi. And to learn more about our mission, you can subscribe free to get updates. We'll also send you the access code to join the Lorehaven Guild for book quests on Discord. And you'll also get notifications about our new monthly live streams, including last week's live stream that I did called Why Christians Need Science Fiction. You can hear more about that later in this episode. Our top sponsor is actually the novel by today's guest, Kathy Tyers, and that sponsor is Enclave Publishing with Firebreak, book 1 of the new Firebird Interlude trilogy that is releasing next week. What would you sacrifice to save your family and your home world? Lady Firebird Caldwell returns to the world of her birth, Nataya, now I know how to say that correctly, intending to introduce her young sons to the noble electors while her husband Brennan conducts a military inspection. When mysterious ships in distress suddenly approach the planet, the electorate sends her to initiate first contact. Forced to work alongside a vengeful childhood enemy, Firebird uses everything within her power, even her passion for music, to negotiate, only to discover their alien technology threatens all the worlds she holds dear. Facing ruthless betrayal, Firebird undertakes a deadly journey to salvage the mission. Brennan must make daring use of his telepathic powers to save human life in the galactic whirl, including that of their young sons, but saving the worlds might force Brennan to give the order that would mean Firebird's death. In a galaxy poised on the edge of ruin, survival may demand the ultimate sacrifice from them both. Enclave Publishing is excited to announce the March 10 release of Firebreak, book 1 in the new Firebird Interlude trilogy by Kathy Tyers, the Carol and Christie Award-winning author and the best-selling author of Star Wars: The Truce at Bakura. It is available March 10 wherever fantastic books are sold. Ask for Firebreak at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order it online from Amazon. It's also available as an audiobook from Oasis Audio. Zach, we've met a lot of folks thanks to our next sponsor, including Kathy Tyers, who is doing a keynote address at this year's Realm Makers Conference and Expo. That is going to be at the St. Louis Union Station Hotel for 3 full days. So we're upgrading from 2.5 days to 3 full days of training for professionals. But there's also going to be an expo for fans at this premier gathering for Christian storytellers of fantasy and science fiction. First, however, calling all authors and artists in the industries of graphic novels, gaming, animation, and audio drama, as well as film and TV. For you, Realm Makers is where you will find your tribe. You'll also get to own your craft and advance your career. Registration is open now for this event. It is in person at the St. Louis Union Station Hotel, June 24th through 27th, and it is also virtual. So 2 ways to attend. My personal preference is attending in person. Either way, you get 3 full days of training from professionals, plus the epic Realm Awards costume banquet to celebrate the best novels released last year. Readers, this is your event as well. That's the expo. You are invited to the expo on Friday and Saturday, and best of all, shopping there is free for the general public. You'll only need tickets to attend the sessions and panels, as well as certain meet and greets with special guests. For all that info and to register, you can go to realmmakers.com, realmmakers.com. You will also get all those links in the show notes for this episode 302. And from there, let us open the Bay Gates and receive now our special guest, Kathy Tyers. Kathy Tyers has just arrived from the planet Nataya in the galactic whirl aboard the transport Comitas. She sold her first novel, Firebird, to Bantam Spectra in 1986, but it too has visited a few other worlds. Now landed, it seems, at Enclave Publishing, where they've also done some other books in that series. There are 5 books in that series so far, but Kathy's also written a lot of other science fiction, a few standalones along the way. And then there was this other galaxy far, far away in which she was blessed to play for 2 books, The Truce at Bakura and The New Jedi Order Balance Point. She lives in Montana with her husband, and now she is back in our studio. Welcome back, Kathy. So great to have you in honor of Firebreak.
Thank you, Stephen. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate you having me on board.
Yes, it's great to meet someone who was with Star Wars before it was cool, or when it was cool, depending on your perspective of Star Wars now. But it's great to know another Star Wars fan. You know, we have a lot of Trekkies on this podcast, and Steve and I sometimes debate that a little bit, but yeah, I'm Team Star Wars still. I still have all the Star Wars action figures.
I get a chance to be the ambassador from the Star Wars universe to a Star Trek con that is going to be held on April 4th in Bozeman, Montana.
Well, that I didn't know there were such ambassadors. How cool!
Yeah.
So what do you get? What do you get to do in that role?
I'm going to actually just get to talk about having written for Star Wars, and I'm going to have a great big box of my brand new book, Firebreak, to see if maybe I can entice some Trekkies into getting into the Firebird universe as well.
That's awesome.
Yes, in that debate between Star Wars and Star Trek, clearly the winner is the Firebird trilogy and those two books afterwards, Wind and Shadow and Daystar. But now we've got the Firebird interlude trilogy coming from our friends at Enclave Publishing, which technically counts as a space opera, although we were just chatting earlier about quasi-orthogonal space, which is the only way to travel between star systems in the galactic world. Kathy, real quick, we've got to ask you, we've had you on here already, but I'm just curious how you got into this business and discovered biblical truth and fantastic imagination. Was it both at the same time or kind of one followed the other? Like, real quick, what's your testimony there?
I started reading space opera type science fiction as a bright fifth grader visiting the junior high section of the local public library. Found a book called The Star Conquerors. It was Ben Bova's first book, and I absolutely loved it. And continued on reading Zena Henderson's books about the people. She did a couple of short story collections about those folks, aliens living among us. Got a little sidetracked by Lord of the Rings in junior high and became a huge fantasy nerd for a while. But I have been a fan of science fiction for a very, very long time. Came kind of sideways, actually, to serious biblical Christianity because I was such a fan of Tolkien that I read that he had this great friend named C.S. Lewis. So I started reading Lewis, and my entire college career was, I guess, enshrouded with readings and rereadings of Lewis's books, not just his fiction, but of course his nonfiction as well. So I have been writing at first just for the joy of writing. It seems that this is what God made me to do. He gave me an imagination, a very vivid imagination, and I decided early on that could be a risk to my Christian walk, or it could be a weapon in my hand. And I chose the weapon option and have really had a wonderful time with it. In fact, my first Firebird follow-on novel was my master's degree thesis up at Regent College, which is a theology school in Vancouver, British Columbia. And for that degree, I could produce a work of art in my genre, and I chose to see if I could speculate what would happen way farther along in the Firebird universe, which was fun, although I did have readers complain that they wished that book had been about the main characters in the original Firebird trilogy, Lady Firebird and Brandon Caldwell. So I kind of filed that away. Life went on for a while, and I am back with Firebird and Brennan. The new Firebird Interlude trilogy will take place immediately after book 3 of the original trilogy.
Fascinating. And I've already started reading that. And as I said to you over the email, it's like having a rendezvous with old friends. It's spectacular. So that was your origin story with space opera, but let's go to chapter 1 as well. Just kind of talking about what do we mean by space opera, which is a subset and overlaps a lot with science fiction. It's part of science fiction. You may want to correct me here, Kathy, because you've been at this much, much longer. But just doing some initial research, a lot of people have different takes on the origin of what you would call science fiction, because that term can include so many different kinds of stories, like even going back to Mary Shelley in 1818 with that first sci-fi-ish horror novel, Frankenstein. But then really there's more of a space travel type science fiction from British author Percy Gregg in 1830, who wrote this poetical Across the Zodiac. And that one's interesting because it seems that he was the first person to actually use the term astronaut, although he was using that for a spaceship rather than the space traveler. Then, of course, you get Jules Verne in the late 19th century, and then at about the same time, overlapping into the early 20th century, H.G. Wells. And Jules Verne, I like to say, I've read a lot more of his stuff. He was one of those polite nod in the direction of Providence type authors, but at least he acknowledged that God existed and that there was a moral code by which the heroes must live. H.G. Wells really brought in what I think a lot of people associate with science fiction was this sort of cold-hearted humanism, a little bit more about humans being the ultimate mammal. There was a lot of emphasis back then on evolution and Darwinism and such. But then you really get, I think, more of this space opera proper with Edgar Rice Burroughs and the John Carter and Princess of Mars stories that he did early in the 20th century. Well, that's my take on it, though. But just in your research and knowing about your genre, like, is that where space opera got started? And what do we even mean by that, as opposed to maybe the broader definitions of science fiction?
Well, that's a really great question. Some of the other early space opera was written by a fellow named E.E. Smith, Doc Smith, they called him. This was the Lensman series. And again, this was about people who had more than human abilities and they were off having adventures in space. I have been told that space opera, unlike what some people think of, that it might be descended from soap opera, is more descended from horse opera, more like Westerns. If you've ever watched any of the Firefly series, you would see the connection very, very clearly there. But the idea that you head him off at the next galaxy instead of the past, and the sheriff carries a blaster instead of a six gun. These space opera stories are based on characters who are a little larger than life and whose adventures are action-packed. There's a lot of adventure. There's a touch of romance, and I think the best of it. And so it appeals to a lot of people who don't think they like science fiction. Actually, they would if the science fiction that they picked up presented believable characters. And I think that's one of the strengths of space opera. And I know you don't want to push too far ahead in its history, so you go ahead and take it up from there.
Yeah, I think that is one of those human emphases that leads people to enjoying it. There is a streak of science fiction, which is, I mean, some people call it hard science fiction, which is much more about the big ideas and the technology. And whether it's a short story or a longer novel, a lot of authors will just take the machine concept and like, well, that's the star of it, is the science. I like some of those stories, but personally, I think, and as a Christian and as a fan, the best science fiction is the one that puts the human heroes first, that never loses the characters. Like Star Trek is sometimes referred to as being a harder science fiction, obviously, than Star Wars, because some of it is just basically pure fantasy, and there's a lot of space opera elements in there too. But most people aren't thinking specifically about the spaceships and how they jump between stars, warp travel and dilithium and all of that. They're thinking about Captain Kirk and Spock and Dr. McCoy, or some of the later characters like Benjamin Sisko. Those are those larger than life personalities that stick out a little bit more than the monster of the week or the invasion of the season. Then, of course, you get Star Wars, where you've also been able to have some adventures yourself, which I would say is even more space opera proper. People remember the music, they remember the human drama. I mean, yes, there's light speed engines and there are androids and some things that arguably were taken from the other Star franchise, like tractor beams, but we'll let them have it. Like William Shatner is still very popular even on social media, teasing Star Trek fans, and actually seemed to be a bit fluent with that other fandom. So in the best circumstances, everybody gets along because our stories themselves have taught us a little bit more about maybe how we ought to be human, even in a future for our galaxy or a galaxy far, far away.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And one of the ways that I have heard science fiction, hard science fiction, and space opera kind of compared is that in believable science fiction, there is a veneer of science as science is actually operated by scientists. My first degree was in microbiology, so I speak science fairly fluently. With hard science fiction, the scientific credibility goes all the way down. Anybody reading a hard science fiction novel would never go, no, wait a minute. Whereas with space opera, the veneer is a little lighter. We're allowed to get away with faster than light travel, for example, which you would have a hard time doing in a hard science fiction novel. In space opera, the important thing is getting there. How you got there? Okay, we'll engage the Bolognium drive and we'll just get there.
Bolognium, I love that.
Thank you.
I want to tell my kids that's how my car works. It's the Bolognium drive. You mentioned Edgar Rice Burroughs, so I know this is a personal favorite of publisher Steve Lobby from Enclave. He talked about that when he was on the show before. That seems to be the origin book for a lot of authors and longtime fans of space opera. And I haven't read Burroughs, but I've watched the movie adaptations of was it John Carter of Mars? I'm thinking of.
Oh yeah, the unfortunate flop from Andrew Stanton. It shouldn't have been a flop. They didn't know how to market it. It should have totally worked.
And right away there was like this disconnect I felt with it, because he's jumping and running around on Mars, and there's plenty of air for everyone to breathe. And I'm like, wait a minute, we all know now that Mars doesn't have an atmosphere. But did Burroughs know that? Because obviously this is before the Viking lander from the 60s. Because this was early 1900s.
Oh, no. Early Mars was basically Old West in the sky back then. Exactly. Right. There was a lot of romanticism, the Lowell canals and all of that. Yeah, it was a very different world in the popular imagination.
But I am so curious to know, like, at what point did astronomers know that there wasn't an atmosphere there? Because I'm assuming he wrote that before anyone knew otherwise, but it's kind of that, it's kind of has that dreamy feel to it. It's like, well, okay, what if it did? Because, Lewis also wrote Out of the Silent Planet on Mars. It's a little different flavor than a space opera, but the same idea of like, oh, what if we could just walk around and breathe just fine on the red planet? But I like that kind of outlook on space opera. And I've noticed as the years go by, and authors look to other planets, star systems, galaxies, there's still kind of that kind of innocent wonder of like, oh, what if we could just go here, go there, do this, do that. And even, and we'll talk about this later, but even some modern day books that are written about our own solar system, being terraformed, colonized, whatever. And there's a space opera flavor of that, which is like, and I think it really speaks to this desire we all have of like, I want to go to the moon. I just want to get on a plane and go to the moon. And I don't want to have to worry about all the, big spacesuit kind of stuff. I don't want to have to worry about lunar dust. I just want to go play on the moon. And I think that's what makes it really fun for a lot of people. And as you said, it's a little less intimidating than like a hard science fiction. And in a way, it's almost like a fantasy, but with space stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. That's one reason that I invented my quarrel. I call it the WHORL, in which the Firebird books all take place. It's a little swirl of stars kind of trailing the arm of the galaxy, where there's an unusually dense concentration of habitable planets, which just happen to have atmosphere. They just happen to have Earth-type gravity. They just happen to have a nice, comfortable temperature. And so that's, as you say, it's a what if. It's very much a what if situation, and it's well suited to space opera. But I tried to put that veneer of scientific credibility onto it.
And I appreciate that, because I've started reading Firebreak, and in fact, Kathy, I'd not even read the back cover fully until we had the sponsorship for. It was actually last week. We had another Armies of the Aliens episode, and the very first paragraph referenced what seems to be a first contact type situation. Which is intriguing to me, because everybody in the Firebird universe, as far as I know, are human beings or human-like people. And if you want to know more, you'll have to read all 5 and soon to be all 8 books in that series. We'll ask more about that in just a little bit. We do, however, have another science fiction novel to talk about, a little bit high concept here, but a lot of human drama from author Dan Dates. That next sponsor is a brand new release from him. It won the Aurora Award from Realm Makers. Also gets an endorsement from our own Zach Russell, who loved the realistic action, witty banter, and the story's redemptive heartbeat. The Whole Man. This is the exciting sci-fi debut by military test pilot Dan Dates. A dying rebellion, a broken family. Can an executioner bring both back to life? The Whole Man has the ugliest job in the universe. He feeds human sacrifices into a black hole. Disgraced pilot Baird Larson is the Whole Man. He's alone on a space station completing his grim duty, and he's told he's appeasing the gods. Baird just wants to finish his penance and return home, but will his daughter even give him a second chance? Then the next sacrifice arrives, and she changes everything. Mazia is a poised rebel with a provocative fire. She doesn't beg for mercy. She explodes his beliefs. Torn between duty and treason, Baird must choose: execute another innocent or join the Shadower rebellion against the Overlord who made him a monster. The fight ahead is brutal, and Baird's combat skills won't be enough. Can he break free from his past sins, save those he loves, and bring hope to humanity's last outpost among the stars? Or will the hungriest black hole consume him first, the one within himself? The Whole Man is now available in all formats, including a multi-narrator audiobook. Nice. You'll have the Amazon link in our show notes for this episode 302, and go to lorehaven.com/podcast for this and all the other sponsors. Chapter 2, why do today's fans love space opera? So, Kathy, I want to circle back to your biography there, because a lot of storytellers will focus on space opera with the kind of the scientific veneer that you called it, those lighter touches with a lot of emphasis on the human heroes and drama, and including romance. But you also have that science background, and you have yourself also written harder science fiction like Shivering World. How is it then that you've come to enjoy both the more operatic science fiction as well as some of the harder science fiction?
To be perfectly honest, I fell in love with my characters. That's just the bottom line. I enjoyed writing about Lady Firebird and Brennan so much that I just keep circling back to them. And it's funny, Steve Lobby asked me that question many years ago. Why do you just keep writing? Why do you want to just keep writing Firebird? And I really didn't have a good answer for him other than that's where the joy is for me. So I've found that I was, I guess, seduced by the space opera side of the Force.
Yeah, I really like that perspective, Kathy. I was just reading yesterday how there are some authors who kind of don't like the characters they create, or at least they don't like how other people feel about those characters. And one of the biggest examples was Paul Atreides from the Dune series, that apparently Frank Herbert wrote Paul as sort of a cautionary tale, or maybe an anti-hero, or I don't exactly know his intentions, but people really loved him as like this hero character. And then Herbert's like, wait a minute. And so apparently he wrote the next couple of books, he wrote it with this mission to sort of unravel Paul's heroism. And it's like he didn't like, maybe he liked Paul on some level, but he wanted to kind of show this dark side of Paul so that other people wouldn't like him so much. I'm not sure. So I like that you have this other perspective of like, I really want to hang out with these characters more and see what they're going to do. I think it's a better relationship you've got with these folks.
That's really interesting. I did not know that about Frank Herbert, and that kind of explains some of my uneasiness with Paul, never really feeling like I could get into his skin. One of the things that I do, I teach writing deep viewpoint. And what you want to do when you're writing really good deep viewpoint is you convince your readers that they have become that character. And as I said, I never really got into Paul's skin that much. Whereas, with my characters, well, sure. And a lot of the minor characters in my book too, I know what it would be like to be that character, which makes it a whole lot more fun.
Well, that ends up going a little meta as well, because one element of the Firebird universe too is that certain individuals, because reasons that you'll find out if you read the initial trilogy and beyond, are gifted with telepathic gifts. And Brennan Caldwell in particular has this kind of super telepathy. And then you find out that that's one reason he and Firebird connect so well. And there really is now what people call, because we like to put labels on stories, certainly in book one, this enemies to lovers effect. That I'm sure you've heard that before, but
Oh, yeah.
lots of authors, including yourself, were doing it before it had a label. And then you end up with this startlingly uncanny phenomenon of having a married couple be the stars of this universe. Certainly in the initial trilogy, and then going forward into this new interlude trilogy. And I'm obviously a big fan of that because it is actually fairly rare that our husband and wife team love and respect one another and work together as equals for a shared pursuit. And I think we need more of that sort of thing. I think that there will be maybe more readers, more fans looking for that kind of thing, because that is something that people want so much from our stories, is wholesome, challenging for certain, but stable romantic relationships. And I think that ultimately wins out over kind of this constant will they, won't they drama, or triangles or quadrangles or quasi orthogonals or
Eek.
whatever other kind of relationships people are coming up with. Like, no, we just want to see Firebird and Brennan together, happy, struggling, absolutely, dealing with crises across the world, but ultimately sharing in this wonderful relationship that glorifies God.
Yes, I think that if people are reading space opera for the fun of it, I think that one of the fantasy elements that perhaps we fantasize about would be being with someone who you love as much as day and night and the stars around you, and you're doing something together. And yes, you're going to have your tiffs. Yes, you're going to disagree from time to time, but you are on the same team, totally alongside one another. And this is something that is so precious in our lives today, within or without the Christian community. We want to experience the depth of that kind of love. You mentioned the telepathy, and one of the ideas that I've kind of played with, although I don't believe I've come out and said it in the books, is what if telepathy were something that were lost with the fall? What if one of the reasons we cannot read one another's minds is that we are fallen and sinful human beings, and it's not good for us? So I put that in part of the backstory to the Firebreak universe, that Brennan's people originated on a world where they were able to regain that ability, and it led to absolute horrific worldwide destruction, because then it was the haves against the have-nots, and no one trusted anyone else. And so we have this small community who survived because of their deep religious faith and their obligations to obey their codes, or else they feel that they deserve to be wiped out.
That's something I really liked about your book, is that religious faith was an important and a crucial and positive element. Sometimes in space opera today, we get a little bit of a mention of religious faith, sometimes neutral, sometimes positive, often negative. The one series that I thought handled it pretty well from I guess a big five publisher was the Expanse series, because there's this Mormon generation ship at the center of it that then becomes this whole other thing, and the Mormons aren't too happy about how it gets repurposed in this universe. But there's a pastor in another book that's a pretty central character, and and Firebird has that Firefly, excuse me, has that as well. It has a priest or a pastor on the ship, and that's also the kind of book where there's that veneer of science, because they have these fusion engines that give artificial gravity, and there's a lot of physics that happens as a result of that. People's bodies change because of the microgravity. But the authors, James S.A. Corey, which is the pen name of Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham, they famously said, "No, this is not a or this is not a hard sci-fi," because we really the problem with a lot of hard sci-fi is you lose who the characters are, and the character or the main character becomes the science, and that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted you to remember the characters, and I still think about the characters from those books. And I think a very similar thing with the series Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Very memorable characters, also just very fantastical. It's like, oh, what if you could have these anti-gravity boots, and what if you terraformed everything in the solar system? But then it's also about this like caste system that they're trying to replace with a better system, and so it's very much this like political drama, but it's a war. Something about those books though is that I almost feel like in some ways they aren't quite space opera, because I feel like with space opera there's very clear heroes and villains. Like you said earlier, how it's larger than life characters, right? And so you know who the good guys and the bad guys are, and it's not always clear in some other books like I've mentioned. I'm curious just your opinion about that, about heroes and villains in fiction. How do you make that clear in this, galactic story world, especially where you said telepathy could be used in really horrible ways? So how do you show the true goodness and the true villainy in that?
You used the right word, show. You show me, you don't tell me. And one of my favorite authors, Lois McMaster Bujold, said once at a conference that the villain's main characteristic is they are utterly self-absorbed. Everything is for themselves, for their own gain, and they don't care two hoots about anybody else. Total lack of empathy. One of the things I've enjoyed doing is writing bad guys becoming good guys. The whole Firebird trilogy originally is sort of a slow motion conversion, a parable. And I have had other characters who are redeemed over the course of my books. And so one of the fun things is that I have noticed that my friends who read my books are often watching the bad guys to see who gets turned, who stops being a bad guy. Because a convincing villain thinks that they're the good guys. They really do. And so learning about something that's bigger and greater than themselves, learning to empathize with other people, learning to see other viewpoints is often part of their conversion, particularly when they come up against some of my characters who are, I guess I'm going to have to say, hero types. But even my hero types have their flaws, have their problems, have their issues. So, but I totally agree with what you said. With space opera, you have a pretty clear delineation. Who's good, who's bad. The reader knows even if the bad guys don't know that they're the bad guys early in the book.
I think that's another factor that distinguishes space opera from harder science fiction or stories that really seem to put the big idea, the philosophy, the science, whatever, in that leading role. The best kind of space operas that I like, including the Firebird universe, do have some science in there, but it's not the leading role. And they do have big ideas, but again, they're in support of the humans. And so they really function as a sort of supporting cast, or to switch to the music metaphor, it's a little bit more like the backup vocals. If you've got an opera, then you've got your leads and they're the ones on stage singing, and maybe there's some instrumentation in the background. And that means that the science, the cool ideas, the technology functions much more as an accompaniment. And sometimes even hard sci-fi, the best hard sci-fi understands that. We'll talk more about that in the next chapter. But that means that ultimately these kinds of stories function almost as well as the best fantasy proper. They are putting humans on the stage, and the ideas and everything support them. And even some Star Trek episodes do that by talking about humanity and, is this robot, why is he trying to be human? And that actually goes back to one of my favorite quotes from Treebeard in The Two Towers, dismissing one of those villains, the wizard Saruman, who's the star of his own show, as having a mind of metal and wheels, and he no longer cares for growing things. And unfortunately, we see some of that even in some of the space barons or the big tech moguls who seem to view human beings as just another cog in the machine. And, if it takes this long to feed and train a human being for a task, well, can we just maximize the efficiency? And, does it take a much fewer resources to have a computer do the same thing? And that is an anti-human perspective. That is indeed a kind of villainy. And it's the sort of thing that the best Christian writers and other non-Christian writers have written against. And it's the best kind of thing that space opera can train us to naturally oppose because we like the human beings too much to see them subservient to machines. Well, let's talk more about the future of space opera next. First, however, I want to talk about the Lorehaven authorship, because now in the Lorehaven Guild, the specific author-supported section there, we're doing monthly live streams. Just this past weekend, I did a live stream called Why Christians Need Science Fiction. Going to keep updating that because as the sciencey news is changing, we need to be talking about how these stories can benefit not just our imaginations, but our souls, not by preaching at you, but by what Kathy said a moment ago, showing these realities in the lives of human beings, whether they're the good guys or the villains, or sometimes the villains turning into good guys. And if you are wanting to write a story like that, we want you to join the Lorehaven authorship, which is within the Lorehaven Guild community on Discord. And you can get into that castle in the clouds by signing up free at lorehaven.com. And then you can look at the subscription options there in Discord and decide which of those three options suits you most. But the guild itself is free for fans and readers. And we just had our book quest through Firebird, actually, the first book. We wrapped that up in February. And you can join that even late and talk about this amazing story. Just go to lorehaven.com/subscribe, and we'll have that link also in the show notes. Chapter 3, what might be the future of space opera? And so, Kathy, now that we, against all odds, share a publisher, I know a little bit enough not to ask about future titles, because you've got a way to make absolutely sure that we've done our homework. And so I will will not try to get more titles in the Firebird interlude series, other than I might make an educated guess that fire plays into the title somewhere. What is it? It was the first trilogy is Firebird, Fusion Fire, and Crown of Fire. I think was the first three. And then there was Wind and Shadow, which broke the template. So you might break the template again. We'll have to see. But is there anything else you can reveal about the interlude series with Firebreak now hitting our shelves March the 10th, I think, if I remember right?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. First thing I will say is that these books can be read and enjoyed, even if you haven't read Firebird, Fusion Fire, and Crown of Fire, as Stephen mentioned, the original trilogy. These books are intended to start a new series. Although, if you're like me, you kind of like getting the backstory first. So I wouldn't discourage anybody who wants to read 1, 2, and 3. They are in the space opera tradition of Star Wars 4, 5, and 6, the original movie trilogy. In fact, it's kind of an open secret that the first Firebird book was originally a Star Wars fan fiction that I decided to get rid of all of George Lucas's copyrighted characters and things because, darn it was a good book and it deserved to be published on its own. There will be one book a year. I can tell you that. It's an interlude trilogy. The reason that there will be one book a year is entirely my fault. I am not a fast writer. My first draft is unreadable, absolutely unreadable. I have to go back and rewrite 4 or 5 times before even my writers group gets a chance to hear it. And then I will go back and I will layer things in. I have said for years that I'm a sedimentary writer, that there's the baseline rock and then there's another layer and then there's another layer. I hear my characters talking to each other long before I see them, long before I can see the setting. So I am a slow writer, and I asked Steve Lobby for 1 year per book. So book 1 is going to be released March 10th. Book 2 has now been turned into Enclave Publishing to be edited. And I am awaiting with bated breath to see what they think of it. Book 3, I am now writing the rough draft. In fact, if you can see the notebook there on my work table, that is book 3 under construction right now. I guess I could reveal that Firebird and Brennan continue to be the central characters of all 3 of these books. So that kind of gives away, I guess, whether they survive book 1. Oh, well. I'm dealing a lot with what it means to be human. My feelings of music being a universal language that's a big deal in book 1. I really hope to get another couple of book covers as wonderful as the book cover for Firebreak, because I think that's the best one I ever had. They did it. Kirk
That's a very cool
DuPont
cover.
did a
Yeah.
fabulous job.
Captain Kirk. Captain
Oh,
Kirk.
he's
All
so
hail.
good. All hail. Absolutely.
It is great. I recognize her. She looks a little different at some of the other book covers, but
Yes.
no, that's her. That's right there. That's Lady Firebird, and there's Brandon right back there
There
too.
he is. Yeah. Yeah, it's the best Brennan I've had on a book cover for sure.
I know there's probably not a lot you can tell us about the story that's going to happen in the next couple of books. So I wondered if we could just imagine for a moment space operas in general and kind of where things are going in the next couple of years, 5-10 years. I've been thinking about the trends that are happening now in fiction, and there definitely seems to be a split that's happening with writers and readers. I mean, obviously there's the indie and traditional split, right? But there's kind of these worldview splits that are happening, because I think at the center of space opera is the frontier. It's this idea of like expanding, our own history of America expanding into the West. And so a lot of stories just dealt with that, like the traditional Western and then now the space Western, right? And I think there's kind of one view of expansionism that's very negative. That's like, oh, we shouldn't expand and should just leave the universe alone. And then the other view is, no, we should expand and go fight the aliens and take their planets or whatever. And so there's sort of that debate happening. And, should even we build technology or should we downsize technologically? I think about the Star Trek Next Generation episode a lot, where they discover that warp travel is tearing apart the fabric of space. So they have to slow down below warp 5 from now on.
We don't talk about that.
I know.
Episode.
It's like,
they fixed it. They fixed it. Okay. Warp 12, y'all.
Just a weird, like, okay, now there's a speed limit for some reason. And so I think about those trends that are sort of pulling on us in these different, you could say, ideological directions. There's one opportunity, I think, which is that what is the role of faith in the midst of this frontier, right? Is faith a positive thing that holds people together, gives them purpose? Because the universe might be really dark and scary and very anti-human and very alien, and we need religion to kind of form strong bonds and give purpose. Or there may be no aliens, and it may, as we talked about last week in the episode, there may be just humans and it's just us, and we have to figure out what does it mean to be a spacefaring, population. So I just wanted to know if you could comment on that. Where do you see the trend in publishing generally going in terms of the space opera, the role of faith in space travel in fiction?
I see no trend in a universal type publishing world at all. I see an exploding fragmentation of the availability of the story that you're looking for. You'll find it somewhere if only you can figure out how to find it, because we now have so many publishing venues available to people, including indie publishing, including the big five publishing, including small presses publishing. So as far as the trends, I think you're going to find the trend that you're looking for. One of the things that is happening within Christian publishing is a rise in what they call Christian humanism, which isn't necessarily the worship of human beings, the worship of humanity, so much as what were we created to be? What does it really mean to be image bearers of the very creative God? And I'm rather a fan of that. I don't know. Stephen, what do you think?
I like the impulse there. I'm forbidden by Christian contract by saying that I'm a humanist, because, that's secular humanism. That's Isaac Asimov. That's Carl Sagan. That's, all the bad guys who didn't believe in God, and we hope they got saved, but, that's God's business. But I do like that human emphasis, because, Kathy, we had a conversation a while ago. I may have referred to it in our previous episode. I forget. It was years ago. I think you had mentioned your work at the university in British Columbia, where you said that you actually had, based on a better eschatology or better view of the new heavens and new earth and the redemption of the physical creation that God's promised, you said that you went back and redid a scene from your novel. I'm trying to remember which scene that was, but you seem to have taken that so seriously that you actually wanted to kind of pull back on what you felt was a latent, incidental Gnosticism. This idea that matter is bad and we need to, think about just floating around in, absorbed into the divine essence or something. But which book was that? I'm trying to recall.
Don't remember.
Okay,
I'm sorry. That's one of those things you check it off the list and move on.
I'll move on. Yeah, we've written so many novels. I will, listeners, I will find that. I better not be making that up because then we have to cut this whole segment, but I'm pretty sure we did an interview or something. I just don't remember exactly which title that was, but absolutely. I think it's great to prioritize the human purpose, the idea from the Westminster Shorter Confession, which is, what is the chief end of man? What's our purpose? What's the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything? And the answer
enjoy God
is
and glorify Him forever.
Exactly. And for the fantasy fan, that means that we're enjoying space opera, music, science fiction, fantasy, Amish romance, whatever you like. It can be enjoyed for the glory of God and the happiness of the person, which are, in the Christian worldview, the same thing. You will not be happy apart from the glorification of God. And for more clarification on that, we're back to Lewis again with his monumental essay, The Weight of Glory. But meanwhile, even from non-Christians, we are seeing more of this kind of, I wouldn't say Christian humanism, but Christianity-derived humanism. And Zach and I may even have an episode all about Andy Weir's novel and the forthcoming film Project Hail Mary. That is one of the most humanistic-looking movies that I've seen, and I'm not insulting, because space opera may have that veneer of science or science as a supporting cast, but from the title onward, Project Hail Mary gives just a polite little salute in the direction of religious tropes, like they're even leaning into that for the marketing. Believe in the Hail Mary and all of this. Well, Hail Mary is not according to Ryland Grace, the protagonist. He's not a Catholic. It's just that the ship is a Hail Mary, literally to save human beings, and it ends up not really being a Christian story, but it is certainly a Christianity-derived humanistic story, and it's very optimistic. And at the end, you're just feeling real great about self-sacrifice and the can-do attitude, the human spirit, and all that stuff. And so I think that's better than nihilism or nihilism. Certainly it's an improvement, but it also is part of the answer. Yes, human beings can do amazing things, but also, guys, space isn't actually that colorful. It will kill you. It absolutely will kill you. We are not in that world of, where Mars is full of oxygen and has Earth level gravity or anything like that. But at the same time, I mean, Project Hail Mary, is a space opera with a whole lot of science and speculative science as one of the supporting players. So, Kathy, I saw you light up there. I mean, we're two sci-fi writers now, loving to see, Andy Weir take off. But my wife and I already have tickets, hopefully to I think it's the IMAX version. And so we're really looking forward to that.
Ooh, nice. Yeah, it was fun. Everyone in my writers group read that book before I did because I was so sucked into writing my own book. But boy, once I got it home, I was like, just everybody leave me alone. I'm going to finish reading this book.
Yeah, audiobook's really good too. Ray Porter is the narrator there, and he does fantastic with it.
We've had Christian hedonism for a couple of years. That John Piper coined that term. So why not Christian humanism? We've had
Christian
another guest,
humanistic hedonist.
Yeah, right. I like it.
Philosophers go mad.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an interesting contradiction, right? It immediately makes people go, well, what is that? How is it different than normal, humanism or hedonism? But, back to this question, what does it mean to be human? And really what I see you doing, Kathy, with your stories is exploring, well, what do humans do? Who are we by what we do? Because I think sometimes what can hamstring any kind of fiction, but in particularly Christian fiction, is when it just becomes around the invisible inner experience of being a Christian rather than the external active experience. Like how do you show your faith, as you said, not just tell your faith? What is it that you do because of your faith? Like that's the interesting thing in a story. I mean, of course, the inner regeneration that we're experiencing through Christ is super important, but where that gets interesting to others is what it causes us to go do. And I think that's the natural playground of fiction, because we naturally want to know, well, okay, so they have a spaceship and they have Jesus, but then what? like what's going to come next? So I can't wait to explore these stories and find out what happens.
Kathy, I got to ask you, you said that people can jump into Firebreak without having read the original Firebird trilogy, although they'll certainly get more out of Firebreak and the whole interlude trilogy. However, should people, if they've never read any of them, wait to read Wind and Shadow and Daystar until after the interlude trilogy? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, what a great question. I've never been asked that one before. I guess it depends on just how much you hate spoilers. If you really hate spoilers, then don't read Wind and Shadow and Daystar until after you've read the interlude trilogy. If, on the other hand, you're like me and you really would rather know the end from the beginning and then you can enjoy the journey more, I can't stand suspense. I'm so weird about this. I cannot watch a movie or a television show where I don't know what the ending is going. It's physically painful for me. But if I know, then I can enjoy it all the way through. And maybe that's part of the problem of having been a writer for 40 years. I know I have a game plan. I have an outline. I know what's going to happen. And so I'm comfortable getting there. So can I give a qualified yes, maybe?
Okay. Yeah, that actually would be my personal answer, just as a reader, because generally I don't like knowing who has the plot armor. Right now, I know who generally has the plot armor, and although you can kind of safely guess that the heroine of the story is not going to die in book 1, act 3, there's a little bit of a bluff there. So yeah, okay, so you could read books 1, 2, and 3, and then 4, 5, and 6, and then 7 and 8, or you could read, like the Star Wars trilogy. You could read the episode 4 first, and then go back for the prequels. The only difference is you made the original trilogy first, so it is almost entirely linear. Well, to learn more about all the Firebird universe and all the other stories that you've made, including the 2 Star Wars books, where can folks stop by to find you on the interwebs?
I have a website. It's kathytyers.com, and that's KATHYTYERS. The ER is the hard part. Actually, my last name is Gillen now because I married a wonderful man who proposed and said, I know you are published as Kathy Tyers, and I expect you to keep on being published under that name. And I love that man. KathyTyers.com. I'm also on Facebook. I have a Facebook page as Kathy Tyers, Kathy Tyers, and you can be in touch with me there.
And someday we will tempt you to Instagram or Bookstagram or whatever it is. There's so many social media worlds to keep up with, and I know you've got your hands full. Kathy, thank you so much for stopping by. Your ship is waiting outside for you to get back on board and then head into the plotting for book 3, it seems.
Safe travels to you guys as well. Thank you for having me on, and thanks to Steve Lobby for making this possible.
Well, what are your thoughts about space opera? Do you like the exploration of the frontier? Do you think we should leave the frontier? Do you think we should conquer it with giant mechs and other big spaceships and just take out all the aliens in our way? Or will there even be aliens as we push outward in the galaxy? What are your favorite stories that explore these kind of topics, particularly of the space opera variety? So send us a note about that to podcast@lorehaven.com. Tell us your favorite space operas, why you enjoyed them. And you can always find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our Discord server, the Lorehaven Guild.
Next on Fantastical Truth, jumping genres, Kaizoku ni Ore wa Naru. Today, around the world, millions of fans who love Japan's hit manga and anime series One Piece are rejoicing for many reasons. First, because after 1,170 plus manga chapters and nearly 30 years since it started in 1997, One Piece creator Ichiro Oda's Pirates with Power story is sailing toward its final arcs. Second, because the popular anime is following soon after, breaking hiatus to resume in April. And third, because on March the 10th, Netflix is christening the second season of the One Piece live action series after season 1 flagrantly and happily broke the supposed anime to live action curse. Why do fans, and yeah, I'm one of them myself, love these comical, earnest adventures of Captain Monkey D. Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates, you can find great stories everywhere, folks. Almost every genre except the few evil ones. Whether it's manga and anime set in an entirely wacky, earnest fantasy world, or space opera stories where the spaceships and the science take a supporting role behind that of the human beings. We just hope you will enjoy these stories for the glory of Christ and your happiness. That's the purpose, not just humans or science for our own sake, but for the glory of our Creator, as we continue to seek and find His fantastical truth.